What up, guys? Welcome to the podcast today. Today we have 2 rules for Jiu-Jitsu. We haven't done these in a while, so figured this would make for a fun podcast for you guys to listen to give you some ideas to chew on for your life and off the mat as well. Big thanks to our sponsors for helping make this podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. If you guys have never checked them out, it's a really cool company. They've got a great story if you guys want to take time to read about how they got started, as they were one of the first CBD companies out there. And right now they're coming out with some new products. Just to let you guys know, Eugene and I think Eugene's got them now. He's going to give them to me to try.
Yep.
They've got some new CBN products. And so there's all these different types of cannabinoids, and they have different effects on the body, right? And so they are coming out with some new products that we're going to try. And when we're done with them, we will let you know what our findings are and if you should try some of them. Because again, if it's worth using, I'll share with you. If it's not, I just won't mention it. That's the way I work. And but again, I've used their products for a number of years now. I really like CBD oil as part of a recovery regime, as part of that sort of situation where, again, as you get older, it's nice to have stuff to help you recover. But not even if you're older. If you're just in a situation where you're training hard and you're trying to recover faster so you can get back into the gym and all that stuff, it's worth a try to see what kind of effect it has on you. So again, if you guys want to, you can go to their website at charlottesweb.com. The promo code is Chewjitsu30 for 30% off the order. And again, if you guys are curious, I use the tincture, which is just the eyedropper. And I use that around 30, 45 minutes before I plan to go to bed and be in the bed as part of my nightly routine. It's, CBD, I take some magnesium and some other supplements, then I take a hot shower, and then I head to bed and start reading for a little bit. I've been listening to some audiobooks, the Dune series. So I really got into the movies, and so now I'm reading the prequels, which in my opinion, I thought the first Dune book was really good.
I thought
And
so
then
too.
the second one and the third one were kind of meh, but the prequels are really good. I really enjoyed them. So again, I'm going through those right now. That's part of my nighttime routine. I start listening to those, and then I have to set the timer because I'll wake up at, 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning whenever I get up. And, I just fell asleep with the phone sitting next to me, So anyway, that said, check them out, charlesweb.com. Promo code is Jiu-Jitsu30 for 30% off the order on CBD. Also, thanks to our sponsor, Epic Roll, BJJ.com. Again, they make jiu-jitsu gear and apparel, stuff that looks really cool. They got great designs, great quality, great customer service. I'm going to be using Epic Roll to come out with some new Chewjitsu rash guards. I've got the design that I like, and so I'm going to come out with some. Eventually, it'll just be like an all black sort of thing, but initially, I'm going to do some ranked style ones like blue, purple, white, that sort of thing. So keep your eyes out for that. But in the meantime, if you guys want to check out their stuff that they have right now, epicrollbjj.com is the website, and the promo code is Jiu-Jitsu20 for 20% off your order on whatever you get. And also, guys, if you want to support the podcast directly, you can do so by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And when you become a patron, you'll have access to an exclusive library of content we've created over the last number of years. Everything from interviews with our guests that we've never released, going over some sort of technical or mental or strategic tip for your jiu-jitsu. We also have some seminars that we've recorded inside there, which go into, with one that I did, some of my best jiu-jitsu techniques that I used in competition, both in gi and no gi, and I show how to change the grips from one to the other. And then Eugene also has a series of recordings in there showing warm-up routines and stretching routines, stuff that's really important. People don't really get excited about stretching and mobility, but I guarantee you, if you do it long enough, you'll get excited about the results that you have, and then it becomes you're willing to put the time in. It's like one of those things where it's like you have to sort of deal with some discomfort and initial monotony, that kind of thing with that kind of stuff. But man, the benefits are really good because again, when you put the work in, you get these benefits where you can move better, your body hurts less, and who the hell doesn't want that, right? And so again, there's some stuff specifically for jiu-jitsu practitioners in there that Eugene's created, plus a lot more. You get all that at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And last but not least, guys, if you would like to join my email newsletter, which I call the Chew Crew, it's what I call the people inside of it, you can join the thousands of people that read my daily email at chujitsu.net/join. Chujitsu.net/join. When you join up, I'll send you everything from jiu-jitsu training tips, books I'm reading, diet and lifting stuff that I find useful, and just anything and everything under the sun that I find entertaining, useful, or that I think might be useful for you. You'll also get exclusive offers to things that I'm doing. Like if I'm running a sale on something, or if I have a new product or a camp coming up, you'll get exclusive offers and discounts that I don't really release anywhere else. One such offer was for my Side Control Escape series, which it's still available at the time of posting this, or releasing this podcast, which you guys can get at jiu-jitsu.net/join. So guys, with that said, let's jump into this podcast. Eugene, I was telling you about the first one before the show, and we were kind of deciding on this. I've got a fun story for this one. So today's first rule for jiu-jitsu is expect to get thrown off the horse into a pile of manure. Now you're like, where are we going with this, right? So check this out. Here, there's a story behind it. So when I started learning how to ride horses with my wife, right? Because if you guys don't know, my wife, she grew up around horses. She grew up on a farm. She's a little country girl. And so, that was something that she did. Well, when we got our house, we have a barn. And I jokingly say that, like, when we came in to look at the house, she went through the house in about like 5 minutes. I mean, she just kind of zipped through it. Okay, that's cool. And then she immediately beelined it for the backyard and to the barn. And she spent like, 30 minutes out there. Now I went through the house and I was like looking at certain stuff to inspect the house a bit. But she was out there, and I remember she was talking to her aunt, who's another horse person. Like, oh my God, it has electricity and water and all that. I'm like, okay, so we're basically buying a barn that comes with a house. And so, she wanted to have the house because she has a horse that was stabled up with her aunt. And so with that, we got into horse riding. Well, I got into it and started learning it. Well, after a few months of riding horses, I was at this little horse thing that we were at, and I got on a horse that I probably shouldn't have been on because it wasn't so broke, but whatever. And the horse that I got on, man, it like basically chucked me off. Got going super fast and basically was just going a little wild and chucked me right off that damn horse. Now, I have been thrown a lot in my life, and so I know how to break my fall pretty well, and I did so. It broke my fall. So that wasn't too bad. That's the good news. Bad news was that my hand, like when I was slapping out, like basically landed to a big old pile of horse shit right there, right in my hand, right? So I'm just sitting there staring at it, big steaming pile of it. And so again, wasn't the most fun situation, but whatever, I got back up, cleaned off my poopy hands, and then got back on the horse. Now, after the session and we were driving home, my wife asked me, she's like, hey, so are you going to keep, riding horses with me? And I looked at her like she was crazy. I was like, yeah, of course. Why would I stop? And she said that she was worried that, because I got thrown off the horse and landed in horse poop that, I thought you might quit. I was like, no, I'm not going to quit. Right. Because I told her I expected this to happen. I expected to be thrown off the horse at some point. I expected for stuff to go wrong, right? Because I know people who are horse people, and I've listened to people talk. I didn't think that, yours bearded was going to be the one sole horse rider that never got thrown off the horse. I knew it was going to happen. And because I expected it to happen, I had no emotional sort of excitement from it. There was nothing to it. It was just like, whatever. I just got thrown off the horse, whatever. And this is something to keep in mind for your jiu-jitsu, right? So with jiu-jitsu, if you are going to be good at this stuff, right? Let's rewind a little bit. When you think of jiu-jitsu, and this is true with anything, jiu-jitsu is sold on the end result, right? Like and this is true with everything, right? Like, so for instance, Eugene, if you're selling physical therapy, you're selling move better and have less pain and da 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 da. You're not selling the exercises. You're not saying, hey, we're going to put you in these really uncomfortable positions that are going to make your hips cramp up because you haven't activated these muscles forever, and it's going to be really friggin' uncomfortable for like 2 minutes at a rip. When someone sort of when you read like books about financial freedom by being mindful about your spending, that kind of stuff, right? They sell this idea of someday being in a situation where you're debt free and you do whatever you want to do, but they don't they don't talk about, hey, it's going to be kind of painful when all these people around you are buying all this cool stuff and you've got to practice some restraint and not doing it.
Mm,
And when like you look at someone selling an idea on how to run a business, right? Um, they don't sell the idea of running the business of like having failures along the way and all this stuff. They sell the idea of like, hey, you're going to run the successful business and you're going to be your own boss and da 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 da. Which again, all of this is true technically, but they sell the idea, the dream on the front end, and then you actually have to do the work. And jiu-jitsu's done the same way, right? Like when someone's selling jiu-jitsu or people are talking about jiu-jitsu who have been in this stuff for a long time, they talk about it in such flowery language. You know, you'll listen to someone like, you know, a lot of people listen to Jocko or Joe Rogan who come into jiu-jitsu, and they'll hear them talk about how it's had this profound effect on them, how it's improved their physical fitness, how it's, you know, improved their mindset, how it's given them this powerful ability to control another human being. And all these things can be yours too, but you got to pay for them, right? You don't get them free. And so a lot of people that come into jiu-jitsu, they have that realization when they come in and they are now like basically getting smashed by Big Bubba and they have a sweaty armpit in their face and they're like, hey, where's this profound mental breakthrough coming? I can't breathe right now and this guy stinks. You know, again, you have to go, these are the things you have to go through. And so with that, with you guys that are training, you have to expect this. Just like, you know, I got expected to get thrown off the horse. If you're going to work on something in jiu-jitsu, if you're going to get better at jiu-jitsu, you need to expect the proverbial getting thrown off the horse into a pile of crap, right? I mean, that's what you need to expect, whether that is getting smashed by a 300-pound wrestler who has you in side control and forces you to, you know, turn his chest hair into your dental floss, right? Or it could be, you know, getting injured and then you're sitting out while everybody else is training and now you've got it. Bad things are going to happen. You're going to fall flat on your face. It is going to happen and you should expect it. And by expecting it, what ends up happening is you don't have such an emotional attachment to it. You expected it. You can prepare for it ahead of time. Whereas if you go through it and you're like thinking it's never going to happen to you or you avoid it, then you have a worse situation where when it does happen, it'll catch you off guard.
yeah. I think like just knowing, I think you talked about kind of going in as a wrestler. You're like, I'm gonna be great. I'm gonna be already gonna be a
Yeah.
blue belt, this and that. And then I think losing initially, and you know, I think that's for me not ever doing any kind of grappling. Like I said, I wrestled for like a couple weeks and I was like, forget this. I'm going to go play soccer. So it wasn't for me at the time in high school. But when I got into it, I knew I was like fairly athletic, but also was like, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing besides watching some UFCs and stuff like that, you know, which is very, very limited. And so like, I think I kind of knew I thought I would be okay at it, but I also knew like, I'm probably going to kind of suck for a bit.
Mhm.
But also when you come in, like I think sometimes we have distorted views because we come in from other sports that we're good at and we are talented in. We come in and we just start to, you know, I think it can be that's why you have somebody come in that's very athletic and then they get their ass kicked by, you know, 12-year-old over here and then they never come back because they have an inflated sense of what jiu-jitsu is going to be like.
Yeah, they had expectations, right? And so that's the thing is expectations are dangerous.
Yeah.
When it comes to a lot of like most things, right?
Mhm.
Expectations are dangerous. And so that said, the best expectation to have is that this isn't going to work out. It's all going to go, I'm going to end up falling flat on my face, whatever. Now, the beautiful part is that if it does not, well, then, hey, you're good. But if it does, and most of the time it will at some point, right? Like it's
Mhm.
not such a big deal to you. It's like, whatever, no biggie, you know, this kind of thing. And so, again, I think this goes back to the idea of just not being so mentally fragile about stuff, you know, when you're training. Like again, if you go in with an expectation that you're going to win or that you're going to be good or that things are going to go your way, whatever, then that puts you in a very fragile position because when it doesn't happen mentally, you'll crack, you'll break. You know, you got like a little eggshell that as soon as like something does goes wrong, you just crack that little
Mhm.
sucker and you fall apart.
Yeah.
So it puts you in a very mentally fragile position. So you got to be aware of that. And so with that, you don't want to set expectations, but if you are going to set an expectation for yourself, expect it not to go well, at least for a little while. And that's kind of your buy-in to any of this stuff. And I think honestly, this is why if you have a deep level, like not a superficial, but a very deep level of skill in something, it allows you to get better at other things faster and with less friction because you know what the buy-in is, right? Like for instance, when I got into horse riding, There's no big deal. There's no friction. When I mess up, I'm like, I don't beat myself up and go, "You're so stupid, man. You can't get this," or, whatever. I just say, "Oh, well, this didn't go so well." Of course it didn't go so well. I've been doing this for 3 weeks, or a month or 2 months or whatever. People spend their entire lives and they're still getting better. Who am I to think that I'm going to somehow master this in 2 weeks or a couple months? When I started getting into the business stuff, lots of mistakes, so many mistakes. Or let's not even call them mistakes, just so many things just didn't work, failures, right? Little small failures. Like I remember me and some guys got together, and me and my buddy and the former owner of the gym back in the day, we got together and we had this beautiful idea of putting together, like, it was like when the first UFC was coming into Louisville. And so we put together this like CD with like this really cool highlight reel of the gym and our fights. And, we had these girls that were like, super cute. One of the guys, like, they was in a fraternity, and they got the sorority, like the sort of sorority
Mhm.
equivalent of
Yeah.
them. They were giving out, we had these girls wearing the shirt that says free DVD. And so these guys, they're handing out all these DVDs to guys out right out front of the Yum Center, and they're here's your DVD. And me and my buddy, I remember we knew, dude, we just knew this was going to work out. This was just going to blow the gym up like never before. We didn't get a single. I don't remember a single person ever coming in and say, "Hey, man, I watched that DVD." And I have the DVD still to this day, and I look back at it now, and I'm like, even if they did pop, I mean, because first off, what probably happened is they walked into the Yum Center, threw the damn thing away. They're like, "Who gives a crap?" I thought I was just trying to talk to the pretty girl, throw the thing away. We should have had them get it while they were leaving, right? When they were all
Mm.
pumped up from the fights, not before. So that's mistake number one. But also, two, even if they put that thing into the DVD player back then, it was not very good. It was just like, this boom, like this techno music playing and this like cool highlight of all of us. It did not, none of it like did very well to lend itself to being resourceful to the person watching it who's never trained before.
Yeah.
And so big mistake, lots of failures there, so many of them in business. But again, I didn't take it too personal because I'm like, well, tried that. I expected some of this stuff not to work. Guess that was
Yeah.
one of the ones that didn't work.
Yeah. What's maybe one thing that you didn't expect, like the buy-in of jiu-jitsu? Like, is there one thing that maybe was a tougher lesson that you had to overcome or deal with? I'm trying to think too. As I'm asking that question, I'm trying to think myself. Obviously, you expect to not be great, get submitted, lose, things like that. Is there a certain buy-in that you didn't expect you're going to have to pay?
Well, sure. I mean, like in the beginning, and that's where like the lesson came from, right? Like I only have the expectation that I was going to fail a lot because I failed so much in jiu-jitsu, right? So that's where I learned it. Because when I was 19, I did not have any such preconceived notions. It's only afterwards that I was like, "Oh man, like I get it now," right? And really I think that the big turning point with that was purple brown belt, when my coaches came up to me and, I changed gyms, and my new coaches were there and they'd been watching me, and at the time I was really struggling. This was as a purple belt. I was really struggling at competitions, wasn't doing so hot, and I had done really well at blue and purple, or white and blue, but was not doing very well purple, and struggling, doing okay, probably winning half of my matches, which I was used to winning like, 80, 90% of my matches. And so they come up to me one day and they said, "Hey man, listen, you've got to start doing different stuff in the gym." Because at the time, every day I rolled, I basically did the same things over and over and over again. And because I wanted to win when I was rolling, right? I was trying to win every round.
Mhm.
And so they like talked to me, they're like, "Look, man, you got to do different stuff." And, I remember I was resistant to the idea because again, I didn't want to lose in the gym because again, I've got a fragile ego. I'm young. And I think that winning matters. Right. And so the interesting part was that as I allowed myself to fail, I got better, like not a little better, like exponentially better. Now there was a dip for a little bit as I was getting used to this, but then I was on the up and up. And I think that that was one of the big things that I struggled with early on that made sense was that, oh, like it's okay to do this. And I know that we talk about this stuff so much and it's so cliche, but it's cliche for a reason because it's the truth, right? Um, so that was the thing that I struggled with very early on. And that's where this comes from. It's like, I expect to fail because I know that's just the buy-in for it. And so the more that I try to hide away from those failures, that I try to shield myself from them because I don't want to mentally deal with the discomfort, the more I hold myself back. Right.
Mhm.
And so it was like once I stopped holding myself and avoiding those failures, I actually got a lot better at jujitsu, like very good at jujitsu. And I think it's one of the reasons why I've been so successful.
Yeah. I was trying to think like, I definitely and even today, like I struggle sometimes if a lower belt gets the better of me. I think that just um it because you have to, you have to open up your game, try new things. Like I said, and the longer you wait, the harder it's gonna be, right? Like if you're a purple belt, you're still kind of learning quite a bit. If you're a black belt, you've already established your game. There's a lot. You want to be well rounded. Mostly, most black belts are, but like I think it just kind of is it's harder to do that sort of thing to when you get a little more experience. But I think I don't know, like me, I cared a lot about winning in the gym. You know what I mean? And I felt like that was a reflection on, I don't know, in some way a reflection on myself. Like I think I tied like my love for jujitsu to like my self-worth in some
Sure,
ways,
of
like
course.
how
Everybody
well I
does.
did on the mats.
Yeah.
And I think that's something to separate that. Like, and we talked about it, it's like it doesn't matter. Like your friends are still going to be your friends, your coaches are still going to, be your coaches, they're going to love you, all that stuff. They're going to support you. Like if you go out there, Chewy, and do your best and you lose, they're not going to be like, oh, Chewy sucks kind of thing, right? Like you're gonna have a support system there. And for me too, like, I've lost and I'm like, man, I suck and I feel bad about myself and all that stuff. But that's okay. Those are things that are important, number one, but also like you have to separate that. Like you put yourself out there, you did the thing, and it's not really indicative of like the progress and the amount of time you've put in. Like it doesn't like take away from that, I guess what I'm saying.
Well, sure. And the thing is, and this is something where you only get it after you get it. Right? It's like one of those things where you only realize this after the fact, and so
Yeah.
sometimes you kinda have to do it because that's, like, the only way you're gonna get it. But that
Just to
idea
lose and struggle and kind
well,
of
not even that. It's like
overcome it. Yeah.
it's honestly it's like you know how people will tell you, "Oh, man, money's not everything," right? When you're poor, like, you're like, "Bullshit." Like, you know what I mean? Like, you know that's in your head, but then you get to a point and like, if you've made a couple nickels, right? Like, if you got a couple nickels you can rub together, you realize, "Oh, there's some truth to that." Oh, like, there is something to it. There is a point where you need some money, right, to take care of stuff, but then after that, there's a point where it's like, "This really isn't moving the needle for my happiness," right? Or even stuff, right? You can think that, oh man, if I get this big house, if I get this thing, if I get this car, this whatever society tells me I'm supposed to chase, if you get this thing that somehow it's going to make you happy. But then the issue with humans is that we get really accustomed to like anytime we rise to a new level of expectations for ourselves, it makes any of the extra enjoyment that we got out of that thing null and void. It just becomes the norm, right?
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Imagine taking a person who was born in like 1920, right? And then you walk them through your house. They would be amazed at how just they would look at your fridge and be like, "Oh my God, what is this? You got an electric ice box and it keeps everything cold and you have ice in there anytime you want. Oh, oh my God, look, you have air conditioning. They didn't have air conditioning, bro." Right? It's like you're like, "Oh my God, you have refrigerator, air conditioning. Like you have all these amazing benefits. You have hot showers." Hot showers weren't a thing for a long time, and, like, you think about this, every major historical figure that you've ever known, like, that was born before, like, 1900 or what like, they never had a hot shower. That's something that you enjoy that they've never enjoyed. They would be, like, sitting there like Julius Caesar would be like, "This is amazing, hot showers." Now, you give them that for, like, 3 months, and then it becomes normal to them.
Sure.
Now they're like, "Hey, I want, like, this other special shower head now," and then you get off into the weeds again, right? And so you gotta check yourself because, like, in the gym, it's no different, right? The first time you submit a blue belt, I remember it, bro. First time I submitted a blue belt, I was like, "Yes." Me and my buddy, like, we were my buddy Chris, we were headed home. We would train together every day. I remember the first time I put a submission on a blue belt, I thought it was so cool. I'm, like, getting good, whatever. But then, it just becomes a normal thing. Whatever, you submit someone, who gives a damn? Right? And so you realize that at some point, no matter what you do, no matter how good you do, no matter how many times you win, how much stuff you get, how many medals you have achieved, it's never really going to be enough. You'll always want something else. Whatever you've done becomes very normal to you, right? And so with that in mind, it's like once you understand that and you get it, perfect. Now dial it back a little bit. So with training, sure, we're talking about this like, hey, don't do whatever. But again, if you're at the bottom of the pecking order, sometimes you're like, man, I just want to win a little bit.
Yep.
But eventually what happens is once you're good enough to win, you'll realize that even if you do win, it doesn't make you feel that much better. What makes you feel better typically is if you know that you're getting better at something, because that's the difference. We can go in and win at training, but what is our goal in training? It should be to get better and develop skills, right? Not
Right.
to beat my training partner. And so eventually you get over that, that desire to just be the best in the gym and in the sense of winning by taps, and focus on being the best in the gym by like developing the most skill.
Yeah. I think that's the goal, right? That's the way. And those
It should be the goal, right?
should be
But
the
again,
goal.
sometimes you only get that after you get it.
Right. Yeah. And that's a probably a tough lesson to learn, because I think most of us that train jiu-jitsu enjoy it, love it, want to be good at it. You want to be good at something, if you spend a lot of time doing something, you want to be good at it. So I think like you can't attach your self-worth or your enjoyment on whether you do well or do poorly in practice.
I mean,
So
you can, but you
you
shouldn't.
should not. It's
Yeah,
not
you shouldn't.
healthy, and it's going to hinder your progress for sure.
All right. So here's one more for you guys today. This is another rule for your jiu-jitsu. When your lungs are burning, look like you're fresh. So this one came to me years ago. So like first off, in wrestling, we always talked about this, where when you're tired, you were always told to like look like you like weren't tired at all. You could never show that you were tired to the other person, right? And I remember in a match in jiu-jitsu, this really came to. I was a brown belt, the guy was a black belt. We're competing against each other, and while we're rolling, it was a very close match. We tied each other in the regulation, which I think was like 7 or 8 minutes,
Mm.
maybe 10. I can't remember. It's been a long time, but a fairly long match, and it tied with us both having an advantage. He got an advantage early on, and I got an advantage at the very end, like the last second. I dove on a Kimura. They gave me the advantage. So I remember, that gives me the advantage. And they're like, I hear overtime. So I'm like, all right, I'm still in it. My forearms are filled with blood. They feel like rocks. Like it feels like my forearms are made of stone. I can barely like wiggle my fingers because they're so cramped, because I was really cranking that Kimura at the end. My lungs are burning. You get that like that almost like it's like you got that burn in your lungs where you almost like taste blood or something.
Mm.
You're just like, I just was exhausted. I was wiped. And so I remember I was getting up and I was starting to get up slowly, and I look over and my opponent was laying there, and I could just see him gasping for air, and he was starting to get up slowly and like and really showing his fatigue. So I got up and I started doing laps. I started jogging around, like I was like, let's go, and so I'm jogging around the mat because I wanted him to know that I was not tired. Now I was exhausted, but I didn't want to show it. Right. I wanted that morale to be on my side. I wanted him to be like it's almost like you punch a guy with everything you got and they just take it and they don't even flinch. That leaves you in a situation like, well, what do I do now? I just gave the guy my best shot and that wasn't enough. Another example was in one of my MMA fights. I remember this very vividly, where had this back and forth. First round is a really good first round. The guy gave me a lot of trouble, and then we're sitting on the corner, sitting in our corners. I'm sitting on my stool, and I'm feeling pretty damn good. I remember this was like my first fight that had gone into the second round. At this point, I was like, oh man, this is pretty fun. It was fun to go out of the second round because usually the fights were over in like a minute and a half. I was like, hey, it's pretty cool, man.
Yep.
And then I remember my corner guy. He was like, I was like telling him, I was like, oh, this is cool. It's kind of fun to go out of the first round. And he said, yeah, okay, cool, man. Let's focus. So as he's telling me what's going on, what he sees. I look over his shoulder and I can see my opponent, and his shoulders are slumped. I can see his breathing's very heavy, and me, I'm not breathing that heavy yet, and I'm like, oh, he's tired. So then they pull the stools away, and I remember telling him, I was like, hey man, let's take this stool away. Let's get the stool out of here, like early, because I wanted to like be on my feet stepping around. And so I'm sitting there bouncing and I'm looking at him. I'm like, I'm letting you know, like I'm ready, and he gets up slowly, he's showing it. And I go in and win the fight in the second round and submit him. And again, so this idea is that, when you're tired, and this is more of a competition thing, but it can even be just if you're getting some of those real hard competitive rolls in the gym, you don't want to show the weakness that you might be experiencing or the exhaustion or the fatigue that's going on, right? You always want to look stoic. You always want to look like you're good to go. And even sometimes you might even try to go the opposite, where if you're tired, like try to look like you're fresh and look like you're ready to go. And this is it's tough, don't get me wrong, but I think it's a powerful thing, because I can tell you that if someone realizes that you're tired, no matter how tired they are, they instantly have a boost of morale, because it's like, oh, they're tired. Oh, I'm good. I'm fine. If they realize that you're more tired than them, no matter how tired they are, they won't feel it like they did before, and they're going to push the pace on you. So always look like you're fresh, even when you're exhausted.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it, and I was just thinking, when I see somebody that's tired, it gives me a boost. I feel like my energy level goes up because I
Yeah,
feel like they're starting to break. If
they're
you're
breaking mentally.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is such a the mental aspect of jujitsu. Obviously, physically, you have to be capable of doing jujitsu, but mentally, like there's such a mental aspect that we can't, like, even strategy, like talking about strategy. We've had some, like Pixley was on the podcast and we talked to him, and like just having that, like, okay, I can do this. I'm just having the proper mentality, the right mentality going into a match. And then just like the boost of seeing your opponent fatigued is just, it just gives you a little bump, and you're just
Mhm.
able to push a little harder, because I
Yeah.
think you just see the breaking. And that goes to breathing too. I'll see how my opponent's breathing, like if they're breathing in their nose or how they're breathing. If they're gasping, that's a huge thing too. I watch for the breathing patterns, which is kind of non-verbal, obviously. And that the other thing is the postural stuff you're looking at. But this is
Mhm.
also something like, hey, you can control your breathing, and if you do, like, it's going to help you immensely, because you can't run that red line all the time. Once you start breathing in and out of your mouth erratically, you're pretty much just trying to stay above water, essentially.
Yeah, it's funny. Funny you mentioned that. So Sunday, I was talking about this to a couple of the guys. It's something that it's maybe a little weird to some, but obviously you'll relate with this. So I was rolling with one of our guys, DT, the other day,
Mhm.
and I think it was like last Friday. And so I I do this thing where when I'm rolling with someone, I will basically tune into, like, if I'm trying to push the pace, I'll tune into their breathing and I'll feel how they're breathing. And like you said, if they're breathing through their nose, they've got plenty of giddy up left. But if they're gasping or breathing very sporadically through their mouth, that lets me know that they're at the edge. Like
Yep.
they're getting there towards the end of their rope. But also, I will place my hands in a way or my head in a way where I can sort of get a read on their heartbeat. So it sounds weird, right?
Interesting.
But it's not hard. Like if I'm passing, all I've got to do is turn my head slightly, and I can instantly feel. I can get an idea of how fast their heart's beating.
Hmm.
And again, if you check your heart rate regularly enough, you can listen to it for a few seconds and kind of know where you're at. Like I can feel my heartbeat for about just for a few seconds, and I'll know if I'm in like the 120s, 130s, or whatever, right? And so I can do that. So I'm there, and I'm like, oh
Hmm.
man, they're in the 170s right now. They're cooking, they're getting tired, and they're gasping for air, right? I know they're at their end of the rope. Whereas if I get there and they're not breathing heavy and I maybe feel their heartbeat and they're
Yeah.
like 120s, I'm like, okay, they got plenty of energy left. And so I was rolling with DT and I was pushing him a little bit, but then like I could tell his breathing was off. His heart rate was really high. And I told him, I was like, hey man, take a breath. And I released some pressure. He took his breath and then we started rolling again. So on Sunday, a couple days after, I was talking about that. I feel people's heart rate, and I listen for their breathing. And he said, "Oh, so that's why you were doing it." He's like, "I was down. I feel like I was drowning." And then you say, "Take a breath." I'm like, "Oh, you're a mind reader," like so.
Hmm.
But again, it's something where all of us have felt that if you've trained long enough or competed long enough, you've felt those moments. I remember years ago in a competition when I was a black belt, I had a match against a guy. He ended up scoring on me first with 6 points, so he swept me to mount. I had a really good knack early on as a black belt of like giving up sweeps to mount for some reason. So I had
Mm.
6 points. I was in 6 points in the hole and it was a 10-minute match. So the match was pretty even for the first 4 or 5 minutes, and then I took over on the second half. And I remember in particular, I passed his guard, took his back, and then went to mount, took his back, went to mount, took his back, and scored like it was like 16 points or something crazy, and then submitted him at the end. But I remember in one point, I felt him go, and I just felt his body just slump, like he was just tired. He was done. He was cooked. And again, he showed that exhaustion, right? And again, we've all got a breaking point. Nobody's free from this. We all have a breaking point where exhaustion will break us. But again, you do your best to deal with it mentally as much as possible. And again, this is something that's part mental, but it's also part physical, because you will not know how to mentally control your body language, your breathing, and your sort of the way that you show yourself until you've been in a really exhausted state and you've practiced that.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, the first time you get really exhausted, it'll fold you over. And it's only after you have practice of being in that state and realizing that you can operate when you're tired, and that there's more in you than you think there is, that you actually can deal with it, and you can basically look like you're fresh, even though you're really tired.
Yeah, and having that awareness too, like, hey, you can even sense that, like, all right, my breathing. If you're able to have that awareness that you're starting to breathe erratically, you can start to slow your breathing down and kind of get yourself under control a little bit more. Maybe you slow the pace down. Maybe you get to a position, whether you're in your guard or in their guard, whatever it is, you can get in a position. Maybe you slow the pace down, give yourself a little bit of time to kind of collect yourself, and then then a final push or another push during the match or the roll. I think having some awareness of that is something really, because once you get past, I feel like once you get past a certain point of exhaustion, it's hard to bring it back. Like, I think you're already like, you're so fatigued. That's it. Like,
Mhm.
but you can get to where you're like, all right, I'm running pretty high. I know I need to slow this down or I'm going to run out of gas, kind of thing. So having that awareness as well, I think, is just something to build. So having awareness of your training partner or your opponent, and then also awareness of yourself, I think can really, I think it's huge, because I just don't know, like, a funny question. Let me ask you this. This is, we ask about all kinds of stuff. How much is something mental or physical? Like, I
Mhm.
mean, like, I don't know. And you could talk to 100 different people, give you 100 different answers. I'm just curious, what do you think as far as jujitsu, mental and physical? Like, how much would you say, or importance would you say, on one versus the other?
I think it depends on the person, right?
Okay.
I mean, because I don't think that there's a blanket answer, because like you could
Yeah.
have, like, for instance, you could have a guy who has a great confident mentality, um, but has a body that's just not going to be able to do it. He doesn't have the physical abilities,
Yeah.
right? And there's nothing you can do about that, right? Um, but then you can have guys who are incredibly physically gifted, and then you've got to get them the mentality, right? You've got to get the mentality of being a winner, right? Like, I had a guy years ago who fought MMA with us, and the dude's name was Nick. And Nick was a physical specimen. Still is, of course, he's still alive, but a physical specimen. I mean, the guy was just a monster. He fought at 185, walked around 195, 200, but he was massive.
Mm.
I mean, every like to give you an idea, we took this guy to the fights, and he's like 6'3", and everybody's asking me, "Who's your heavyweight?" I'm like, "Oh, that's our 185 pounder." And he wasn't cutting some excessive amount of weight. He just was built that way. We would go do sprints, and he would dust everyone. I mean, and again, just this freaking big 6'3" like dude from Texas. So Nick was a monster, but Nick was also, like, at the time, he struggled mentally. Right? He was mentally a little weak. I remember we would be in the gym, and I remember, like, this is the time where I'm like leading from the front kind of thing. So I have to, all the tough sparring sessions, I got to be in there first. And so we have him come in and we're sparring. And I mean, we're going, and I'm shelling up and taking his shots. Man, every time he hit me, it was like his shots were reverberating in my bones. It was hitting
Mm.
me so hard. I mean, because the guy would fold heavy bags with his leg kicks and his punches. Dude was just powerful. Now, eventually he started getting tired, and so I started punching him, and then I remember he tried to turn around, and he's like, "I'm done, man. I'm tired." And I said, "Bullshit, bro. Like, I'm getting my licks in now. Like,
Yeah.
you can't wail on me for 3 minutes and think that you get to just back out now that you're tired. You got to fight through this." Now, I didn't take it too hard on him, but I kept popping him in the face until he got his hands back up. And but he would give up a lot during training, and we broke him of the habit and got him up. But I remember taking him to the fight, and his opponent was in front of us, and we were getting ready to go out for the fight. I'm right behind him, talking to him, reassuring him, being like, whatever, touching it, like rubbing his shoulders a little bit, just like, you got this, bro, whatever, talking to him. In front of him is his opponent, and he's looking at his opponent, and he's like, bro, he looks so damn big. And I mean, bro, this guy, Nick, dwarfed this human being, and I had to like snap him out of that real quick, right? And he went in there and just destroyed this guy. But he was a guy where physical specimen and struggled with the mentality. So I don't know if there's one over the other. I would honestly say that it's probably more physical, I think, and then becomes mental, because what happens is a lot of times the physical sort of precedes the mental, because again, we say you got to be confident. Okay, well, it's hard to be confident if you physically suck at this thing, right? Because that would be delusion. If you're like, I'm really good at jiu-jitsu. Well, no, you're not. You suck. You just started training. And I don't want to say you suck. You're just not trained, right? You haven't training very long. You're not very good at it yet, just like anybody else wouldn't if they've been training for 3 weeks.
Right.
If you are getting ready for a competition and you don't feel confident about winning because you get smashed by everyone, well, there's probably a reason for that. We develop confidence by actually doing something, not by affirming ourselves and telling us I'm good enough, I'm strong enough. No, you do it by like going in and doing it and reassuring yourself that you do have what it takes. Now, sometimes there can be a mental hang up that you have to deal with on the off side, but a lot of times you can deal with it on the mental side, just like the exhaustion element, right? There is a mindset element to it, right? But you have to be there with it physically to deal with it. Like if you've never experienced like exhaustion and had your lungs burning and had to operate under those conditions then you have, if you're like, I can deal with this mentally, it's all delusion because you've never been there before.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know. Right. And so I think that, again, a lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, it's 80% mental, 20% physical. That's nonsense. I think that some people can struggle a little bit more mentally. I think some people struggle a little bit more physically, but at the end of the day, jiu-jitsu is an art that is done with the body. So the physicality issues there. This is why, you could have a 20-year-old black belt and they might mop the floor with a 50-year-old black belt who's technically knows way more than them, but just physically they're in a body that's not nearly as physically capable anymore. Right. It's just the way it is. And so I think that jiu-jitsu, I follow this philosophy. It's more of a philosophy of doing. Right. We respect the doing, not necessarily just the thinking. We respect people that have put themselves on the line and they've done things. We respect the coaches who have helped people accomplish things, not just the people that like talk about it. Right. We respect the people that do it. So I think I would say it's more of a physical thing. But again, each person has their own unique situations and challenges that they have to deal with.
Yeah. It's interesting to me. Like you're talking about that guy, Nick, like physically, he was just like such an imposing figure, but like mentally I wonder why that was or how that is. Like, and I think some people can be very like, if they're physically not terribly imposing, but mentally they're kind of resilient. It's kind of like some of those people coming into the gym and just they're getting beat up. And then eventually they start getting a lot better and they start getting and they're used to losing and they're kind of mentally resilient. And then once they get their physical part of themselves, whether it's technique, whether it's strength conditioning, whatever it is, they get the more of a physical component to their game. They start to become really dangerous because they're used to that. Like we talked about, again, expect, some of these hard things, these difficult things, losing, struggling, getting tired, expect that stuff. And once you get used to that, it just becomes the norm. And eventually you can kind of work through those things because you're kind of expecting them.
Yeah. The only downside with that, which happens for a lot of people, is that they end up having, it's almost like fat guy that got in shape syndrome. So like, for instance, when you get better at jiu-jitsu or if you lose weight, it tends to happen very gradually.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for you to sort of wrap your head around that, because it's happening so gradually. You don't feel like you're changing until someday you've changed and then you have to update. You have to get like a software update or firmware update, right? Like you have to update what's going on there. And, for a lot of people, it's difficult. So like, for instance, with, your jiu-jitsu, you would probably have to have some experience where you really test yourself to prove to yourself you've developed these skills. Because otherwise you're like, I just still feel like the same person I've always been, and just like that with people that have lost a lot of weight. I know that I was in this situation. And it's like you're still kind of a big guy trapped in a you're a big guy, you're not happy with yourself, but you're trapped that's now in that you're trapped in that mindset, but you're actually in really good shape and people can see it, but you can't. I remember one of our students, Dakota, I remember talking to him when he was losing weight, and he's in great shape now, and like he's a jacked dude, and he doesn't even realize how jacked he is. And I was telling him, I was like, bro, like you're gonna eventually realize this, but you've completely changed who you are. Like the old person, they are gone, bro.
Yep.
Like they're unrecognizable. Like you don't even look like the same person. And so, it'll take you a while, but you'll eventually get over that. And so I think that sometimes happens for those people who come in, they have no expectations at all, and they're just very resilient and they're used to getting smashed. But then once they start getting good, they have to struggle with that then mentally that, oh, I am good at something. Finally, I am good at this thing, opposed to, I'm not good at anything and I'm expect to lose at everything. Like, no, you are good at this now. And that can be its own struggle for those people on that end.
Yeah. I wonder what that is. Like, I wonder how someone comes to that realization. And it's probably different for everybody, but like, how do you realize, like for me, I don't know. I think
Challenge yourself.
Yeah.
Go
Do
something like
tournaments or
go do a competition, go find the toughest roll in the gym, do whatever. Again, it's a philosophy of doing, right? So you go do something that then proves to you that you are more than what you think you are. This is kind of like what happened with Pixley, right? When Pixley was talking about, we went to Fargo and he tech falls the
number one
guy,
guy. Yeah.
the number one seated guy, and then all of a sudden it's like he's the dude, right? And he had ideas that maybe he is pretty good, whatever, but now it's like, no, I have unequivocal evidence that I am that guy. I remember for me, this was tough where in high school wrestling, the first match where I was like, hey, I think I'm good at wrestling. My first couple of years in wrestling, I didn't do very well, because again, my first year I got injured very quickly. And then my second year, I very mixed. I had a losing record, but I had a couple wins, but I wasn't great. But I remember there was a guy, he was a same year as me, but he was actually pretty good. He was winning matches and wrestling in like some of the brackets for the tournaments. And I remember his name was Rocky. And so Rocky was wrestling and he went against, some people, whatever. I remember watching him as a junior. Well, senior year rolls around and we have a home meet at our gym. And during the season, so far, I had been doing pretty well. I was like, been doing pretty well, but I was winning matches against mostly, okay people, not great people. Right. So again, it's whatever. And then I remember I had a match against Rocky. Now, again, in my head, I'm like, man, this is going to be a tough match because this guy was good last year and I was not good last year. So in my head, I'm like, he has the advantage. You know what I mean? And so I kind of went in there like, let's see if I can give him some hell, but I wasn't necessarily expecting to win. And then in that match, I ended up pinning the guy. And I remember it was crazy because their team is screaming, Rocky, Rocky. Our team was screaming Tugboat because that was my nickname in high school wrestling. And so they're screaming. And then I pinned the guy. And I remember getting up and I'm like, it was like, for me, this was like this update of like, you're no longer who you think you were, the person. And this is our ego, right? Our ego who tells the stories about ourselves, what we think about who we are, that has to get updated periodically. Good sometimes bad, right? Or we don't have to say bad, but in unpleasant ways, right? Like maybe you have your ego has to update to the fact that you've gotten older and you're not the shape you used to be, right?
Yep.
But I had that update. And so I think the key to updating all this stuff is to challenge yourself, right? Put yourself in challenging situations. If you want to see what you're made of mentally when you get exhausted, see what you're made of. If you have gotten good at jiu-jitsu and you're struggling with it, you're like, I don't, whatever, then go out and challenge yourself. Go to a competition. If you got your brown belt, your black belt, and you're like, I don't really know that I'm there, go out and do a tournament. Prove to yourself that you are where you are. That can be a really powerful way to update, because then you have evidence. You have this story now that you can tell yourself that, I didn't feel like a black belt, but hey, I won a black belt tournament. I think I'm where I belong, right? That kind of thing. That's the thing that I would say.
I agree. I think the when you said it's a philosophy of doing, I think you have to do the damn thing. Like you have to do it. You can talk about it as much as you want, but you have to test yourself and challenge yourself, and you have to actually do it, and then you'll know. And I think that's really, it makes perfect sense. It seems like, obviously the other stuff helps, being mentally, talking yourself up and those type of things. But actually, taking that and turning that into actual product of winning a tournament or winning a match or whatever it is, and proving to yourself you're actually capable, I think is absolutely what you have to do.
100%. Because again, at the end of the day, you don't know until it's happened, until you've been tested, right? You don't know. And so if you have a question in your mind about a situation, the best thing to do is move towards it. Moving towards your fears is generally a good idea as far as growth and becoming the person you want to become.
Yeah.
I wrote about this in one of my Chew Crew emails the other day. There was a story about Theodore Roosevelt, like two of like my favorite historical figures in American history, Theodore Roosevelt and Booker T. Washington. And so it was like 1901, and Theodore Roosevelt was inviting Booker T. Washington to have dinner with him. It was the first time that a current elected sitting U.S. president had ever had dinner with a black man, right? Kind of a big event in U.S. history, right? And Booker T. Washington's a really cool figure in history. And so he said that, and I'm going to paraphrase this because he has different language, right? It's 1900, different vernacular. But basically what he said was, Theodore Roosevelt said, is that at first he was kind of wavering on inviting him because he was afraid. He was afraid of what would happen if I do this, and the news, the media, the South, and all these racist people start just lambasting me and start saying terrible things about me, and they try to negatively affect me.
Mm.
And he said that in that moment, because of that, because he felt that feeling of like nervousness and anxiety and fear, he said, I sent out the invitation even more quickly. Right. And so I think that's the thing to catch, right? He didn't do it in spite of the fear. He did it because of it, right? He moved towards that challenge that he was nervous about and just did it. And then afterwards, it became a big deal. He was attacked in the media, but it didn't matter anyway.
Sure.
And it was a big deal in history. And again, we look at it very favorably, right? So I think for all of us, right, like that's an idea. Like sometimes we have these challenges that maybe make us a little afraid, a little nervous, give us a little anxiety. Like maybe you just got your black belt and you're nervous about testing out your black belt. I know I was when I got my black belt. I wasn't sure if I really belonged as a black belt. I had to go prove it to myself. Some of the matches I had in high school wrestling where I was winning matches, I was like, I have to go prove it to myself.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're in the gym and you're like, I really want to get better at this position and I want to prove to myself that I can do it. Whatever, you have to go challenge yourself. Or maybe mentally, like you want to develop that ability to look fresh when you're exhausted. Well, you have to move towards that really uncomfortable space of being tired, being exhausted, and still keeping going, right? And again, that comes back to just doing. Comes back to doing the damn thing. All right, guys. So hopefully you enjoyed that podcast. Hopefully you got a couple ideas to chew on for your jiu-jitsu. And again, if you guys ever want to send some feedback to the podcast, you find something useful, feel free to share it on social media or Instagram, and tag the Jiu-Jitsu podcast into the stories and stuff like that. I know you guys send me messages sometimes, but poor old Eugene, he doesn't always hear about it. And so
Yeah.
I know a lot of you guys send me messages that I get some messages pretty much every week. Shoot a message over to the Jiu-Jitsu podcast if you guys do, or feel free to share something there if something stuck with
tag
you.
us and we'll reshare it or send it on through the messenger on Instagram or email.
This way
whatever.
Eugene can see the positive impact that he's making on some of you guys too.
Something like
also,
that.
Big thanks to our sponsors for helping make the podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. Check them out at charlottesweb.com. Promo code is Chewjitsu30, CHEWJITSU 30 for 30% off the order. EpicRollBJJ.com for jiu-jitsu gear, apparel, great customer service, great quality stuff. EpicRollBJJ.com. Promo code is Chewjitsu20 for 20% off. If you guys want to become a patron and support the podcast directly, patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And last but not least, guys, if you guys want to get my daily Chew Crew email, you can do so by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join. When you join up, you'll get my daily email, and you'll get a couple gifts I give away, and you can unsubscribe at any time, or you can just join the thousands of people that like reading it every day. And that's that. So, guys, thanks so much for being here today. Appreciate you guys. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll talk to you next week.